Continue to follow the increasingly partisan confirmation battle over Judge Brett Kavanaugh. But while the president shows support for his nominee to the Supreme Court, he's slamming the man he chose to lead the Justice Department, Jeff Sessions. Trump, who's long accused Sessions of failing to protect him, expressed his frustration in an interview with the Hill newspaper today, saying, quote, "I don't have an attorney general. It's very sad." He said that. Unable to hide his contempt, Trump said of Sessions he wanted to be attorney general, and I didn't see it. And then he went through the nominating process, and he did very poorly. I mean, he was mixed up and confused. This is Trump talking about his attorney general. It's the latest evidence that Trump views the attorney general as his own personal fixer, whose job it is to insulate him from the law rather than uphold the law. And later, when pressed by reporters, Trump wouldn't rule out firing the attorney general. Here he goes.
I'm disappointed in the Attorney General for numerous reasons, but we have an Attorney General. I'm disappointed in the Attorney General for many reasons, and you understand.
Are you going to fire him? Are you going to fire Jeff Sessions?
We are looking at lots of different things.
Lots of different things. The Washington Post is tonight reporting that the president's associates say he increasingly believes he is unprotected. Yet his attacks on Sessions have raised alarm. As one former White House official said, "It's a complete disgrace. What an absolute baby. He's disgracing himself." Anyway, joining me right now is Bill Weld, the former Republican governor of Massachusetts, the former head of the criminal division of the Justice Department, who also ran for vice president this past time on the Libertarian ticket. Also, Ashley Parker, one of the great reporters of our time, White House reporter for the Washington Post, who co-authored this report. I'm going to start with Ashley about this thing. What is Trump up to? Is he trying to bully this guy out of office?
Well, yes and no. It is more that he is just, again, expressing his sort of sense of anger and betrayal and frustration.
Why out loud?
To be fair, he's done it out loud for quite some time. I think early on there was a thought that he could pressure Attorney General Sessions into leaving. That's simply not going to happen. He's frustrated and he's angry and he wants to be protected and he simply can't contain it. This is a president who says out loud sort of the stage directions and what he's feeling, and this is what he's feeling right now.
Governor, thank you for joining us. What would happen if he fired him, say, the day after this election, which there's a lot of suspicion he's going to do? Will that open the floodgates to him finding an attorney general who will quash this investigation on Russia?
I think the president's treading a very dangerous path here. When he says, I don't have an attorney general, he means I expect the attorney general to be loyal to me. And as you said, that means protect me. That's just a massive misunderstanding of the idea that in this country, we have a government of laws and not of men. It's pretty close to the kind of undermining of the rule of law that forced President Nixon to resign.
Well, in his interview, the president also claimed incorrectly that, quote, now it turned out Sessions didn't have to recuse himself from overseeing the Russia probe. However, it's been clear since day one that Sessions, as a former surrogate during the election, would not be able to oversee any investigation of the president's campaign. I'm so sorry. The Code of Federal Regulations on Recusal says no employee shall participate in a criminal investigation, excuse me, or prosecution if he has a personal or political relationship with any person or organization substantially involved in the conduct that is the subject of the investigation. That sounds like the law.
I think Sessions was well within his rights in recusing himself. I served with him as fellow U.S. attorneys in the Reagan administration and never heard negatives about him. He was well liked in the Senate. I thought he made the right call on that. I will say that, I think undermining the rule of law, failure to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, that was a cornerstone of the Nixon impeachment. Article 2 of the articles against President Nixon got the most votes. And it's about exactly this sort of thing. And the fact that you do it in the open is not good enough as an excuse.
Do you think the fact, if you put it all together, the offer, the request for loyalty from the FBI Director Comey, the asking Comey to go easy on Michael Flynn, his national security advisor, the firing of Comey, and you put it all together with the statements he's making now about it's the job of the AG to protect him, to be his protector, is obstruction?
It's pretty close. The demands for loyalty really give me the creeps in a law enforcement context. I've often said that I think in Washington, in this town, all too often loyalty is an excuse for doing the wrong thing. And demanding or even requesting loyalty from someone in a law enforcement context is damn close to obstruction of justice.
Actually, put in perspective what's going on with the president now going out there and saying, I'm going to release all the text messages, all the email, all the classified information, everything these guys have in their drawers or have on their phones or anyway. I'm releasing it all, no matter whatever happens.
I mean, I think on some level we have become desensitized to this because the president has been at war with his own Justice Department and his own FBI just about since the day he took office. But you sort of cannot overstate how remarkable and how striking this is that you have a president who, for instance, chose Attorney General Sessions just to go out and trash him just about every single day, who was at war with his Justice Department, who was at war with his FBI. And as the governor was saying, at the very least, it is horrible for morale in law enforcement. And is also an erosion of trust in democratic institutions.
How do you think he's going to get out of it? A whole series of pardons, then agree not to run for re-election? What are his options at this point?
I don't know. I can remember sitting around the dinner table many years ago saying, well, if President Nixon fires Archie Cox, he's gone. Well, he did fire Archie Cox, and in less than a year, he was gone. And I sense that kind of temper here, and I'm really not saying this as a pundit. In a way, I'm giving the president a piece of advice, almost a warning. This stuff is really important.
How about the Republican Party? Is the Republican Party still vulnerable to truth? Do they still respond to fact? Or are they now so regimental in their support for this president they'll back him to the end?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think if the Dems did win the House, probably an impeachment proceeding, a trial would result, and wouldn't be a pretty picture. So it'd be 12 months of unremitting negative publicity for the president. I don't think you'd get 10 Republican votes to remove him. So I don't think he's going to be removed through the impeachment power. But it could lead to tough slogging at the ballot box for the president on the reelect if he should run.
Yeah, it could take 2/3. Thank you, former Massachusetts Governor William Weld and Ashley Parker.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.